All right, and we are back for what was it? A couple week delay. Were you guys on last week, Bryce?
No, we didn't. No,
All right.
Cody was traveling last week, and I didn't get on. At least if somebody else did, maybe.
Cody is the traveling man once again, traveling this week. So we will see if we have anybody else hop in the room here for the next little bit. But I guess plenty to talk about in terms of not just space. There's always that stuff to talk about, and admittedly, we lean on Dan Geraci for a lot of it. He has yet to appear this week, but plenty going on in the markets. We got finally, I guess, the first big downdraft of the year. What are you making of this? I think
Yeah,
we were chatting in the green room. It was like we were overdue, right?
Right. Yeah, and we were just talking about kind of the rate cut situation and the market just finally kind of had coming to this realization that hey, maybe we're not going to get 4 rate cuts or whatever it was pricing in. I think if I remember correctly, coming into the year, the bond markets were pricing in like a 90% chance of or like a 70% chance of a rate cut in March, and then like a 95% chance of a rate cut in June. And now Fed Powell comes out and it's like, hey, inflation's sticky. We might not be cutting for a while.
Right.
And we've been saying all along that like, hey, we don't think there's going to be a lot of rate cuts this year. The Fed doesn't need to cut rates. And for whatever reason, the market just whistled past that. And we're finally getting a pullback. And so, and it really, I was just looking at triple Q's peaked at 446 and in March, and we're at 425. You know what I mean? Like almost 5%. So it's this is very natural and good.
Like 6-7%, I think, is an average healthy correction. Not even correction, but I guess pullback in a market such as this. I forget exactly what that stat was I saw yesterday, but like anything 6% range, still perfectly normal, which is still south of here.
Yeah.
And it can't go straight up forever. I mean, we've been spoiled. Those on the long side have been anyway since late last year. So if you're of the longer-minded view,
year, don't you think? I mean, there was a few pullbacks last year, but all in all, the market still had a great year.
Yeah. Yep. And I think what percentage of your worry goes to like the yields? Like we're getting up like 4.6, 4.7. Last time we were up at like near 5% for the 10-year. That was late last year, and that was the bottom. We came out of that, but we're starting to creep back into that 4.7 territory, getting close to 5. And then when that happens, the safer money can be parked in that. You don't have to go chasing dividend stocks and REITs and whatnot, and a lot of that money just comes out and parks in that high yield.
There's our boy Dan. Hey Dan,
how are you?
Good. We were just talking markets. So
interest rates and whatnot.
Keep going.
Exciting stuff.
Keep going.
Yeah, well, all I was going to say is, there's definitely an inverse relationship right now between yields and the broader markets. And in terms of the real impact, like it's a little bit different than the 2008 type scenario where we have a bunch of levered up corporations that are, can't service their debt. Most corporations have, plenty of cash and/or they're locked in on, they issue debt at 2% and it's locked in. Now, there's the commercial real estate world, there's banks, and there's, utility companies that are a little bit more rate sensitive. But, the market is dominated by the big tech companies, and the indexes are 30%, 5 or 6, 7 names. And those 5, 6, 7 names aren't really sensitive to interest rates in terms of their actual earnings. Now, that doesn't mean their stocks won't go down if rates go up. But, if Google keeps doing what they're doing and Apple does what they do, they're really not that rate sensitive. I don't think their earnings will contract, but the valuations, of course, can always contract. And that's the ultimate determining factor, and earnings.
Yeah. And I guess, you mentioned, some tech companies, but I guess the less capitalized tech who would need, cheaper capital, it would certainly affect those guys, which makes up a lot of tech. They can't all be in NVIDIA or Google or Amazon.
Yeah, they're not all cash cows. But
Well,
you know,
the other issue you have too is inventories, and so you're seeing, because of the supply chain issues of the last several years, the ability to finance large inventory is becoming a big issue now. Just talking to a manufacturer, one of our partners, and they're saying, hey, we just made arrangements to be able to start financing the stockpiling of material for manufacturing because we're not sure if we're going to have what we need when we need it. So I think you're going to see this good news, bad news of people financing in that sector, manufacturing, to build inventory, which is going to create another supply chain problem. It's going to be like hoarding when COVID happened. Couldn't find toilet paper, right?
Right.
So it's going to be a similar thing. We're not on a steady path any longer. We're doing these, hiccups and knee-jerk reactions, and I think interest rates are getting affected more and more by that as we go forward. And the other thing is just, it's hard to compare the market today to the market once upon a time, and we all look at the charts and we all talk about record levels of this and that with the Dow or the S&P. They're very different indices from what they were back then. And to your point, Bryce, about utilities, when I got in the investment business, it was the utilities and the transportation, the big two indexes. And now it's apples and rocks compared to back then. And too few tails are wagging too many dogs when you talk about technology and other sectors that are so dominant in terms of market cap.
Yeah.
And I think people just have to, it's just making a better case for professional money management is what it's doing, because individuals, it's just going to continue to get more and more complicated to find your way to consistent profitability trading your own stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's this because of the dominance of the mega caps, there's been a move in the last, 6 months. A lot of the talking heads talking about, small caps, like they're going to small caps to get out performance because they're afraid, that these mega caps can't get any mega earth. And we were like, I think 40% of the Russell 2000 is not profitable. And I'm like, you can't just go buy the Russell 2000 either, and so there's no easy answer here.
There isn't. There isn't. And the answers aren't going to get any easier going forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the big challenge. These indexes are so outdated now, and every time they update it, they just make it a completely different thing.
Yeah.
That it was before. That makes it impossible to say markets have improved, market returns are consistent. They're consistent, except the composition of that performance is completely different. So it doesn't tell you about the environment or what sectors are performing. It just tells you what kind of job people are doing, putting things in and taking them out of the various indexes.
Dan, you want to change topics a little bit, talk a little bit about space, and give us an update on what's happening in space?
Tell us about the space, Dan. What's going on up there?
The space. Well, last week, I was at the National Space Symposium, the largest space event of the year. It's held at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. Estimates were that there were close to 20,000 people.
Wow.
I believe it.
Did you all have a booth, Dan?
We shared one with a number of Arizona space companies and ASU and UA and some others. Unless you're a relatively good-sized beast of a company, you just can't afford symposium. If you saw some of the exhibits, these multi-million-dollar exhibits from Lockheed and even Boeing, I'm not sure how they can afford that right now, but they did throw a good reception. That's what everybody was talking about.
Boeing can spend the money. They're good at that, Dan.
Oh, they do that quite well.
Was it a rushed reception? just with lack of quality control and
it was a little bit random, and everyone was leaving there to go to the much larger Lockheed reception that was being held. It's hysterical.
I think I saw a picture of Peter Beck and Rocket Lab there. I think it was that same thing.
Yeah, Rocket Lab was there. But the important thing is, this is where everybody in the industry goes, and this is the most intense networking and business development environment. Every military from practically any country you could think of was there, including our new friends from Norway and Sweden and NATO. And so it's very heavily military. Loads and loads of meetings going on about strategy. Probably the most secure place in the United States last week, given it was there. Of course, the Broadmoor, this massive resort that they've been using every year, they have a contract for it, is at the base of Cheyenne Mountain. So you have that beautiful backdrop, knowing that there's a whole bunch of people inside that mountain working while you're sitting there. But the security was very high. There was a lot of discussion about the technologies that are required for closing the gap, especially where hypersonics is concerned. A lot of new technology rolled out with that in respect to that. There's a seminar going on right now that I was listening to before jumping in here, where NASA is doing a big webinar on technical shortfalls. Where do they have technical shortfalls that need to be filled? It's a fascinating conversation because there are so many that it's hard for that. I can see why there's a problem, because they're showing you these little heat maps with hundreds and hundreds of projects on them and how they prioritize. It's like there's no prioritization. It's an oxymoron. And ironically, they had trouble with the slides. So one of their technical shortfalls is doing a presentation.
PowerPoint.
Yeah. So
is there any like? Go ahead, finish your point there, Dan. Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, in terms of just the technology, like when you go to that kind of a thing, or is there anything that like you learned, or a company that's doing something that, hey, this is an exciting thing like happening in space that we didn't know about before the conference?
There's some of the more kind of wild ideas on the fringe that don't get much press or talked about in most circles. But the only thing that I came away with was just a greater conviction that there are so many players taking the posture now in 2024 of moving aggressively forward for commercial as well as government space. It was very encouraging. I mean, I was at the satellite conference in the month before in Washington. That was a record number of people with great energy level and a good vibe. Same thing with this. A lot of discussion about stations, a lot of discussions about these first sets of orbital transfer vehicles that'll be used to get rid of debris and then move on to start, transporting things around from one orbit to another, etc. A lot of contracts were announced last week with a lot of smaller companies who have, they tend to try to announce them going into these conferences, then they book tons of meetings.
Yeah, leverage that press.
And it was a great week for us. We had tons of meetings, a lot of new things on in the pipeline. But everybody's in full business mode. No one was there to watch. Everybody's trying to do business. So it's a good sign. It won't show up. It's a good leading indicator for the sector.
Right.
But it's probably a 6 to 9 month leading indicator.
Yeah. I know one of the contracts that got announced last week was, I think Rocket Lab got a new deal with the Space Force for a couple launches out of Virginia for some program that I don't even know exactly what they're going to launch, but I saw that headline.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about launch schedules and who's got what and who can meet them and who can't. We're waiting for a little CubeSat called CatSat to launch for now 2 years plus, and it's supposed to go up May 14th on Firefly. Of course, one of the engineers came in this morning and said, it's probably going to slip a month. Here we go again. They haven't canceled it. They're just pushing it a little bit.
Well, one of the things that I saw last week, and I don't, it's probably been talked about some, but not a lot, but Morgan Stanley came out with this 150-page deep dive on SpaceX. And I'm about halfway through it. But there's like, SpaceX is the elephant in the commercial side of the space industry. And, you know, I don't know when the Starlink IPO is going to happen, but I think this is a pitch by Morgan Stanley to take Starlink public, if I was going to guess. And then Morgan Stanley is Elon's bank. They've helped him with a lot of things. So it wouldn't surprise me if they lead the IPO, but I think it's on the horizon.
Yeah. And I would expect that to be the case because of the prior relationship, but you have to take all these reports with a grain of salt, because they are pitches. See what we think of your company, see how much we know, see how expert we are at telling people about your company. Wait till you hear the response to the report. Gee, a lot of people are reading the report institutionally. We're the right guys to lead. And so, this is, and they should do that. The challenge is how much is there in the report that is generally unknown, that is newer information, analysis, metrics that you would look at, Bryce, as an analyst and say, oh, gee, this is interesting. Gee, I haven't seen this done before. Versus it just being, what everybody knows, but they're trying to put a nice wrapper on it to have a report.
I would say most of it is the latter. It's a nice wrapping on what most people know. And we internally modeled SpaceX pretty well. And we're probably even more optimistic than Morgan Stanley is here. And, the biggest thing that Cody and I talk about and what his critique of this report is, they didn't even address the Mars moon possibility. It's the launch business, and really they're not even that bullish on the third party launch business. Really, they're bullish on Starlink. It's most of the EBITDA in the 2040 or whatever they modeled out to, 70% of that's coming from Starlink.
Yeah, because they have no way to forecast anything else. They have no comps. They have no TAM for the market that they could say, oh, they're going to get X% of the market share. They are the market right now.
Right.
And so they can't go anywhere near what they would normally go near, which is verticals and the diversification of the business going forward and what the opportunities are for all these segments. That is as much of an admission of where the bankers are in terms of their knowledge of the industry as anything else.
Yeah.
And so
wouldn't it be interesting, Dan, if somebody came out with a report what the lunar economy, actually model it out. Hey, okay, you're going to have this much launch, you could be tourism. I don't know, just start putting pencil to paper and put some real numbers on it that are realistic, but optimistic.
Well, and there's the qualifier right there at the end, realistic. That's what you won't get.
Yeah.
Because you can't start doing what you're saying without people think you're doing the sci-fi fantasy routine.
Yeah.
Because, we're going to need this many launches. We have to build all these things. We have to put people there to do these. And everybody's going to go, whoa. Yeah, that's all based on if and when we can get how much there and at what pace we can keep launching. And so before you get to all that cool stuff, it still comes back to, okay, so in order to do all that, they have to be able to launch 5 starships a day, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
That becomes the calculus. And that's what changes the whole dynamic of what the forecast looks like is launch frequency.
One of the things on that they did touch on is that SpaceX's Artemis plan, I think, requires extra starships to be in LEO, waiting there with fuel to fill up the actual the starship that will go to the moon. I think that's been out there for a while. That plan has been in place. I didn't know that, but when Apollo went to the moon, and I looked this up, they did not refuel in LEO, right? They just went straight on through. And
you brought everything with you.
Why the Apollo Saturn rocket or whatever it was just had enough fuel to get there, and now SpaceX needs 5 starships waiting to refuel it or something like that?
Well, it's going to be for different things, and Starship is a completely different configuration. It does a lot more stuff. Apollo was just, 300 feet of fuel with a spacecraft on top, and so it was just get out there, land, come back up, come back. Um, don't carry a lot of other stuff that's going to require more fuel.
Yeah.
Don't carry a lot of components that may have to get refueled. You're going to have to be. You may be in orbit longer. You may be on the ground. You're going to have to lift off an entire spacecraft instead of one little piece.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
you start going through all that. It's a lot more fuel.
Yeah.
And
do you think that's impractical, Dan, or could you?
It does today. It
Yeah.
does today with today's technology. The fueling is being resolved anyway because we need to have our fuel depots in orbit, which is what we have with Orbit Fab and some of the other companies that are out there building fuel depots. So that'll be a pretty common thing. It'll be very common to have one of these tugs, one of these fuel tugs, go fill up its tank and fly over to where your spacecraft is and top you up. The way in the old days, the oil truck would come to the house to bring the oil, the heating oil for the house. It's the same thing. We're going to have gas stations that deliver, not just the other stuff. But at the same time, you can pull up to these orbiting stations and plug in and refuel. That'll be mostly the transfer vehicles that are going to want to be doing that. And then there's other ways to fuel, which is being developed, which is the
have you looked
at
VLEO? What about nuclear propulsion? Is that a viable option? At least once you're in space, probably not leaving the atmosphere.
A lot of people are working on nuclear. There's a big project with DARPA to do this, but for transportation between the Earth and the Moon and out to Mars, nuclear is going to be the only way to go. So that's going to get a lot of momentum. It already has a lot of funding, but it'll get a lot of momentum. It's getting momentum on the Earth too, by the way, with the alternate fuels crowd who are realizing that we're not going to be ready for wind and solar anytime soon to solve anything. So suddenly nuclear is becoming a friendlier option, which I never thought.
Who are the players in the nuclear propulsion that you know of, Dan? I know some, but I'd be interested to know you.
There's a company called Dark Fission that's working on some nuclear.
Dark Fission, you said? I was just.
Yeah. You won't find much on them. They're pretty stealthy still. Atomos, ATOMOS, they're building transfer vehicles, but their longer term strategy is a nuclear propulsion. There was a company I went through the Seraphim Accelerator with in the UK that's doing nuclear propulsion, but the fuel for the nuclear propulsion is water.
Interesting.
Excuse me. And then there's a lot of work being done in VLEO, very low Earth orbit, right at the top of the atmosphere, to skim the atmosphere and scoop all the hydrogen and oxygen, break it up, make fuel, continuously replenishable supply. That's going to be a bigger source, I think, as we go forward, because there's no waste. You just it's like a ramjet. You just scoop it out of the atmosphere, produce fuel, deliver it, and it's an endless supply.
Wow.
So,
exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's a new market that's breaking out. VLEO, very low Earth orbit. It's good for Earth observation. Very low latency, closest to the planet. Fly over really fast. Creates a whole new set of challenges for satellites. Antennas, you're getting buffeted by the upper atmosphere, so it really puts wear and tear on the satellite. It's pretty wild stuff.
Heck yeah.
Anyway,
what about, we haven't talked that much about crypto, Kavana, and space, SKTLs crypto, and one of the things everybody that's going to be coming up is the award. So SKTLs makes an award every year to startups, and and the amount I think varies, but there's a percentage that comes out of the pool that was originally set aside when the token came, was originally offered. And so I don't know if that's been set up yet. Where the people that do that for SKTLs are not here right now, I don't think, but just everyone watching, keep an eye out. Well, if you know a startup or an eligible company that would be interested in receiving, the award, reach out. And last year, I think there was 3 or 4 companies that got, a few $1,000s worth of SKTLs at that time to help their startup. And the point is to help clean up space. So, space startups that help clean up space. So keep that on the radar. But Cabana, anything else in crypto?
Oh, not really. I mean, we have Bitcoin finally busted below 60K briefly today. It bounced right back through. Now we're above 61, but just interesting. I think, like we were talking with the general markets, crypto as well needs some healthy consolidation here. It's not a bad thing. That and Ethereum doing the same thing, Bitcoin and Ethereum. So
do you have an expectation for an Ethereum ETF timeframe?
I think the decision is next month, but I'm seeing a lot of what we both saw about, I think, too high of expectations for just like with 3 to 6 rate cuts this year. There's a lot of optimism about this getting approved next month, and I just can't see it. Like they had to pull teeth to get Bitcoin done. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think it'll get pushed back until maybe late this year or whenever the next deadline is next year. I don't know. But the optimism around that, it gets me a little, I don't know, just apprehensive about holding a huge stack of ETH, because if all these people really think that this ETF is going to get approved and then it doesn't, then you could, have a trapdoor situation with as volatile as crypto is, and people selling their ETH, which I'd be there to scoop it up because I'm a long-term believer. But
in Ethereum specifically,
I mean, if that opportunity presented itself, I mean, I don't think
so. On Ethereum, I was reading this report, Cabana, and I think it's JP Morgan, and they said the transaction volume on the network was like almost equivalent to what MasterCard did like in volumes last year or something like that.
Yeah.
And that sounds amazing to me if that's true, because like I use MasterCard and Visa all the time. I know everyone I know uses MasterCard and Visa, but I've never done a smart contract on Ethereum. Like who is doing all of this transacting on the Ether, on the Ethereum chain? Like,
I mean, you have like NFT mints that will just soak up, they'll clog the chain. You'll have mass liquidation events like we saw over the weekend, to where Gwei, which is like the gas in Ethereum, it's hung around like 20 Gwei on average. Right now, what is it? Let's just take a look here. It's down to 12 right now, which is like cheap. That's like normal cheap prices right now. That spiked to over 500 on Saturday when the liquidations were occurring.
Whoa.
So to swap on Uniswap, it was $300 just to do a transaction. For batch transactions, because I didn't do any of this, by the way. I'm not going to enrich miners like that. I don't have any transactions that I have to do that desperately. But I just tested like a batch transaction for one of the things I have, and normally that transaction would have been, I think, around $400, which again, it's a batch transaction, so it's a ton of transactions stuffed into one. That at that time, the Gwei peaked was $18,000 to do that transaction.
Jeez.
So that's how crazy it can get with these spikes. But I mean, it's being used. People are building on it. That's why I'm bullish on it. And we mentioned briefly, I guess, the proto dank sharding a couple weeks ago. If they can get that under control, the fees under control, the costs under control, Obviously in these, volatile spikes where the price of ETH and everything else is going crazy. I mean, that's gonna jack things way up. But just the medium cost coming down, I think that would be great for the network. Like still paying $25 to do a transaction is silly. It wasn't so silly ago, decades ago, when we paid that for like stock transactions and stuff. So
Right.
maybe that's kind of where we are.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know if it's the same or not, but I mean, merchants complain about Visa and MasterCard taking 2% all the time, and I'm
Yeah.
like, there's no way if you're gonna pay for a cheeseburger and you pay $25 transaction fee, that just doesn't those economics don't work, you know?
Yeah, and like you're just enriching like the middleman or whatever,
Yeah.
and it sucks, and that's why I think a big reason why Binance was chosen for the SKTLs
Yeah.
token because of the cheap cost. It costs cents to transact there. Same thing
And-
as Pulse Chain, a lot of other chains. What's another one? Matic.
Solana is.
Yeah, Solana, but yeah.
Are you not a Solana fan?
I'm not. It's just centralized, and they can turn it on and off, and that's not what crypto is about, in my opinion.
Okay, well, interesting. Yeah, I didn't.
I mean, I can see it succeeding because partly because of that, and I'm not saying it's a terrible investment. I just don't like that. Oh well, Solana's down for 6 hours, and it's just like, okay, you have these other chains out there who never go down, so it's like. The fact that they can turn it off and turn it back on
Yeah,
again.
I remember that reading this big article too about the founders, and there's like a nonprofit or something that organizes and controls it, but then they actually make a lot of money, and they got awarded, like everybody that works there, was awarded a lot of founders tokens, and there's really not that much decentralization. And obviously, I guess you think there's no decentralization.
It's pretty much the most centralized, I guess, blockchain.
Yeah,
is the way to put it. And it's just like, okay, well, people want to go play there. That's fine. I know quite a few people who are building on it just because that's where it's got their own following, just like Ethereum does, and even Cardano for whatever reason I'll never understand. But yeah, there's so many L1s out there, and I think it's. And that's why you're seeing L2s too, because you're seeing things built under Ethereum because the cost is so crazy that something like a Pulse chain, where it takes $25 to do something on Ethereum, costs 4 cents to do on that platform or something else. So that's kind of where it's going. But I also think that's kind of why Ethereum really wants to get this their fee situation under control, just so people transact or use some part of their network for it, instead of just being like, okay, this is really ridiculous, I am going to Solana, I'm going to build over there because it's cheaper or something like that, or Binance, like with SKTL. So
it's true. Cool. Well, we're coming up. We usually try to keep these about 30 minutes, and we started a little bit late today, but Cabana, Dan, appreciate everything. You have any final thoughts, Dan?
No, it's been, I guess this is one of those things will be quiet for a few weeks just because of all these big conferences or so many meetings that all these companies are doing follow up on right now. Everybody's got their head down. But I would pay attention to the news for space to see what announcements we get in the next few weeks. There should be some material contracts, maybe launch that I'm hearing as well. But some big commitments are getting made now for certain types of technology that have to be delivered in 2025. And all that work's being done now to get them ready. So I would just say pay attention to the headlines. Today, it's kind of business as usual at the mature companies. Nothing really exciting that's going on a day-to-day basis. NASA came out and said we're dropping that Mars sample return after all, and you've got all the NASA planetary scientists, all the centers like JPL and all the others up in arms right now. We've basically walked away from ESA in this process too, our partners in Europe. So doesn't look good. Doesn't
And
look
Starship, we should be getting another launch in the next month or so, perhaps.
Hope so. We
Yeah.
need all the launches we can get. So
That's the goal.
that's going to be the determinant to when we get where. So
Yeah.
how frequent can they get them up there?
Got a question for fun for Bryce.
Sure.
Bitcoin sees first a 49 or 79 handle.
49.
49 on its way to 79. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think we get low 50s. I'd be surprised. It would take I think an elevator liquidation event to get down there, which is normal in crypto.
Crazier things have happened.
Yeah, I think we can stair step down to mid low 50s, but I'd
Yeah.
take the 79. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
Cody and I talked about it actually some point this week. I was like, "What's our buy? When do we start buying the IBIT back?" Because we sold pretty heavy when we were up in the 60s, high 60s, 70s. We both kind of thought, 55 gets interesting, and 50,000 we'd be buying, big time buyers there. So
yeah, there's a lot of bids unless they were pulled mid 50s. So I think
yeah,
there's a good bit of support there. Now that could be spoofed and pulled or liquidated if some crazy event happens. Knock on wood, it doesn't. But yeah,
well, the halving is supposed to be on Friday, and there could be some fireworks, right?
Friday at what, like 6 p.m. Eastern, something like that ish.
Yeah, I
Depends
don't
upon
know.
the block times, but yeah, I think that's the estimate.
Yeah, everyone that's very bullish on the halving may not be so bullish next week if they don't get the action they're looking for. We'll see.
I'm hoping for a halving whoosh, and then
Yeah.
that be it. But maybe everybody else is too. But we'll see.
I think there's a lot of bulls in it, so we'll see.
Yep.
All right, cool guys.
All righty. Let's
Thanks. Till next
call it a
week.
week. We'll be back next week, same time, same channel, 4 Eastern. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks.
See ya.
Have a safe weekend.